I'll start out pretty broadly, but going into the report, basically starting at the top, we have kind of the main information, which includes like the site identification and the site characteristics. So that'll include at the top here, we have this rendering, we have three standard ones that are tied to every report. But then up in the right-hand corner, we have the site address as well as the price for the property. And these are, as you probably know, if you've requested a report, you can choose to disclose the project address and the price as well. But otherwise, we have the main site identification, which is the zoning district, zone and the height districts, the maximum units, lot size, TOC tier, if it is within one, and the number of lots that it's in. So that is kind of just like the essential information to kind of identify the property. But going into existing conditions, as you're probably familiar with already, this is directly from the county assessor. So this is just kind of a brief summary of the improvements that are on the piece of land right now, including the floor area, number of units, when it was constructed, and the improvement in land value from the assessor. So yeah, that's the main part of what is on the land and what's existing now. To kind of go through the development potential and the red flags and caveats, I have this this slideshow. I can just go through this. Now, just starting out, these are kind of the main questions that people have. Like, for the most part, it's pretty straightforward. But the first thing that we identify on the development standards is the floor area ratio. So floor ratio is obviously exactly how it sounds, the ratio of the floor area on the site to the lot area. But this diagram is helpful to exhibit what that means exactly. So 0.5 FAR, it would be basically if you're developing half the lot at 1 story, or if you do quarter the lot, then it'd be 2 stories. Similarly, a 1-to-1 FAR would just be 1 story across the entire site. So essentially, the floor area takes up the entire area of the lot for that piece of land. Yeah, and then it goes on to FAR is obviously 2 stories at that. But this, I feel like that's pretty straightforward for the most part, but I think this diagram does a good job of exemplifying that. Just this also demonstrates the setbacks and how those are kind of calculated. City of LA for residential properties, they all have setback standards. Usually it's for multifamily developments, it's going to be 15 foot front, 5 foot size, and a 15-foot rear setback for a regular property by right. But this just kind of shows what you get. The buildable area is defined as this. So basically, when you're looking at the report and you see the buildable footprint, and this is what it is. So usually when you're looking at an R4 property, that will be taking into account these setbacks here. And then the envelope will be calculated based on this buildable area calculation. So if it's a 3-to-1 FAR, and this is specific to the city of LA, and it'll vary from city to city. But in the city of LA, if you're developing an R4 property and the FAR is 3-to-1 by right, then you take the buildable area, which is basically what this area in gray is, and multiply that by 3. It's not actually the full area. Now, when you do development on a commercial lot, I think it's C2 through C5 properties, you're allowed to use the lot area in calculating the FAR. But there's also no required setbacks as long as there's no residential units on the ground floor at all. Yeah, and then calculating dwelling units. I'm sure most people are familiar, but in the city of LA, every zone has a corresponding density limit, which is measured through minimum lot area per dwelling unit. So, for example, the R4 zone will have a minimum lot area per dwelling unit of 400. So if you have, say, a 4,000 square foot lot, then that will yield 10 units by right. So if you're doing a by right development, aka just by the zoning code, no TOC or density bonus incentives, then that figure is always going to be rounded down. So say you have 4,300 square feet of lot area. You divide that by 3, and it's about 10.75. So even though that would round up to 11, you always round down for by right developments. But this actually changes though when you go for bonus incentives like density bonus or TOC, where the base units will be rounded up, and then the bonus that you get, whether it's 35% through density bonus or 50% from TOC, that's calculated with the rounded up base units. And then when you calculate the bonus units, you also round those up as well. So it will usually return like 2 or 3 more units than that would otherwise be provided if you didn't get that bonus or that rounding perk essentially. Yeah, let me unmute. Does anyone have any questions on what we covered so far in terms of the dwelling units, the setbacks and buildable area or FAR? All good so far?
Yep.
Okay. I'm gonna mute you all again. Yeah, so moving on, we'll go into zoning notation and the various overlays that are in the city of LA. But starting out with zoning, so basically this would be, I mean, usually it's more simple than this. Usually it's just the base zone with the height districts. Yeah, sometimes they'll have a prefix which would be either a qualified Q or T condition, which is either qualified or tentative conditions. Qualified conditions, as it says here, there's not really any base definition. It's just another layer of kind of zoning that either limits particular uses or will limit the development parameters that you can kind of achieve on the site. But this can apply to just a single property, or it could be specific to a block or a neighborhood. Yeah, they can really vary a lot though in terms of what kind of geographical areas they cover, as well as what they limit exactly. And then T conditions are tentative classifications are kind of similar to Q conditions, but they're basically just you may need to pay a certain fee or make a certain improvement before you're allowed to develop on a certain property. But then moving on, you go into the base zoning, which is the main part. So this is a commercial zone, obviously, and this will decide the permitted uses is really the main thing. But then also setbacks and lot standards, which would mean minimum lot size or minimum lot width. But obviously, these vary as well across cities, but usually it'll be R for residential, and then it'll go one through 3 or 1 through 5 based on the intensity. So R1 being single family houses and those uses, and then getting more and more intense as as the numbers go up. And then similarly with commercial, you have your kind of neighborhood serving uses in the C1 zone where you would get, but then when you get up to the C4 zone, it'll be more intense uses. And then the next number, this 2 would denote the height district. So this is kind of particular to the city of LA. But yeah, the height district really only applies to the floor area ratio requirement as well as the height limit. And usually there's only an absolute height limit if you're in height district 1, but otherwise it would just cover the FAR. And then the CDO denotes that it's in a community design overlay, which is a supplemental use district in the city of LA. And there are various supplemental use districts that I'll actually go through on the next slide, but this will basically impose additional standards depending on what kind of overlay it is. But I can explain those further in the next one. Yeah, so these are the overlays that are usually applicable in the city of LA. But just going through them quick, the specific plans, I'm sure most know already, but it basically is a special set of development standards for a particular area. So it can really be thought of as kind of a mini zoning code for a particular area, but also the standards that you'll find in specific plans can vary a lot from just adding a few extra parameters or adding another layer of scrutiny. But other specific plans will change the entire zoning code for a neighborhood and basically stray pretty significantly from the municipal code itself. Community plan implementation overlays, they're kind of similar to specific plans, except they're development regulations tailored to each community plan, and usually after a new community plan is adopted. So the city of LA is divided into 35 different community plans, and those are updated every, I would say, 10 to 15 years. But kind of the point of the CPIO is to kind of help to implement the standards that they're trying to create for the new community plan. But the most recent ones, which actually came out like about a year ago this time, were for South LA and Southeast LA. So those are the newest ones. Community design overlay, we touched on in the last one, but essentially CDOs are used to foster kind of a distinctive character in a district. So that'll usually include standards for like architectural features on buildings, or create new standards for a building's relationship to the right of way, or kind of helping to foster a sense of place in a particular neighborhood that has kind of a distinctive character. So there's off the top of my head, like I know there's one in like Miracle Mile or like Carthay Square. Usually if it's more like quainter, villagier, then it's likely to have a community design overlay. The river implementation overlay is kind of similar to the CDO, except it's applicable to the river adjacent areas in LA, well, to the LA River. But it's kind of meant to support the ecological health of the river and kind of helps to support compatible land uses and encourages parks as well as multimodal connectivity between the river and its surrounding environment. Interim control ordinance, or ICO, it's basically used for neighborhood conservation. So it will like create a moratorium on development in certain neighborhoods if there's a pending HPOZ in a certain neighborhood. It'll basically control that so that nothing else, they can't whisk some projects through there while they're like drafting a historic district, so that they can kind of keep it intact while they're evaluating what to do with that kind of neighborhood. Clean up, green up, or CUGU, that will be the suffix. It's also similar to RAO, just kind of creating, foster like a better compatibility between industrial areas with other sensitive uses in the vicinity, like homes and schools, to kind of reduce the cumulative health impacts that those would do. Queue conditions, delimitations, we already talked about. Delimitations, I'm not sure, but it's similar to a queue condition where it limits the development parameters of a certain property, but it's always tied to a height district. So it will usually only apply to limiting the building height or the floor area ratio. And then going into the bonus programs. So when you go down the report page, and you have the development standards for TOC or DB, this is what it's applying to. So the California State Density Bonus, that's obviously a statewide program, and it provides 0 to 35% bonus based on how many affordable units are provided, and that can be applied anywhere in the city. But there are also provisions in the zoning code that allow you to pursue a density bonus project above 35% through a conditional use permit, as long as it meets the additional requirements. And for that, I think you get 1% or 2.5% bonus for every 1% extra of very low income that you provide. So I think the base for 35% at very low income is 11. So basically, if you provide 12%, then you're going to get the extra 2.5, which would bring you up to 37.5. And then that's obviously a sliding scale. But that's used a lot when you're pursuing like a 100% affordable project or a supportive housing project. In the transit-oriented communities, that was the program that was created through Measure JJJ, where that's only applicable in the city of LA. But you get density bonuses based off your proximity to transit. And those, so basically you're placed in a tier, so it goes from tier 1 to tier 4, tier 4 being the highest, meaning like basically a quarter mile away from a transit stop. But obviously you only get those if you're close to train stops and everything. So just going into a little bit more detail about the differences. They mostly function the same, where you're allowed base incentives. So basically what you get automatically when you apply for it, and that'll be increased density and reduced parking. but for TOC, they also added increased floor area as a base incentive, whereas it's an additional incentive in the density bonus ordinance. But otherwise, it's usually reduced setbacks, lot coverage, open space, and increased height or transitional height as an additional incentive that needs to be applied for. But once you apply for bonus incentives, it basically becomes a discretionary project that would go before either the City Planning Commission or the Director of Planning. But also the other main difference is that when you see the percentage of affordable units that need to be provided, the density bonus law, under density bonus, the percentage of affordable units is based on the base units that are allowed. So if you're required to provide 11%, 11% at very low, then that would be 11% of the base density. Whereas in TOC, if you're required to provide that much, 11% at very low, then you need to provide 11% of all of your units for very low income. I can go back. Does anyone have any questions on? I'll try to unmute again. But does anyone have any questions on the density bonus and TOC provisions? Hello?
What's the percentage for affordable units?
That will
Say
depend.
11%.
That will depend on your TOC tier, what level of density bonus you're asking for.
Yeah.
I believe the base, if you're doing density bonus, the base like for 35%, 11 very low, 14 low, and 20 moderate. But yeah, those will vary based on the TOC tier that you're in and the.
3시 반, 반 전이도록 하겠습니다. 예.
Any other questions on?
아니 저 상원님 집에 안에는 뭐 이렇게 크게 안 봐도 돼요. 예, 알았어요.
Let's see. See, I think going on, we touch on RSO units as well, which I think is on the next page. Might be easier to actually go backwards on this, but as most of you probably know, rent stabilization ordinance is basically the rent control mechanism in LA. How that works is, well, this is actually about to change with the state law in 2020, but the city of LA, it limits the rent increase on rental properties constructed before 1978. But basically, when you're applying, when you're trying to demo a property under RSO and you're redeveloping a multifamily development, then you need to replace the rent stabilized units that you destroy at a rate of either 1-to-1 or 20% of the total new units in the development, and it's whichever is greater out of those. So yeah, then the affordable units have to be the same mix of the existing rent stabilized units, and they can't be distinguished from the market rate units, meaning they can't have any separate design feature, or they can't be all clustered in one corner of the apartment building. So they kind of stand out. And there's this touches on the very low and extremely low income that you deal with when you provide the affordable units. But basically, HSID, which is the Los Angeles Housing Community Development Department, comes out annually with figures that sets the thresholds for the maximum allowable rents, as well as the maximum income that you need to qualify as extremely low, low, or very low. But basically, yeah, so extremely low, I think, is 30% of the area median income. Very low is like 50% of AMI, and then low is I think it's like 70 or 80 AMI. But that's basically just how those are calculated and how you kind of need to figure it out when you're planning to develop a partially affordable project. Yeah, that was in the slideshow. Yeah, I can open it up again and open this this report. But if anyone has any questions, I'm gonna unmute you all again. But if anyone has any questions in terms of what I just went through in the slideshow, or just the report itself, you feel free to ask them now.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
How accurate is this report? 100%? 120? 200?
we like to give it about a 99.9. I mean, we've as we do more and more reports, our processes get fine-tuned more and more. So now we've been doing this for almost a year and a half. We've kind of worked out a lot of the kinks, so it's basically automated to the point where we can kind of guarantee it.
Can you disclose any situation where someone hasn't gotten the right information or what has happened?
Yeah, we would definitely own up to that. No question. Obviously, the most important thing to us is making sure that the user is getting the right information. And we're obviously not gonna lie to you if we find out that we were wrong otherwise.
What about properties that are in the opportunity zones? Do they have different criterias there?
Not in terms of zoning and land use. We do make a note of it on our reports. You'll see down here. We do know whether a property is in an opportunity zone or not. And that obviously gives you more favorable tax incentives. But in terms of actually developing it, doesn't actually make a difference. It's just going to be in the dollars and cents of making the development work.
Could you, would you recommend pulling some reports for a couple properties? One's a commercial, one's a residential next to each other, trying to tie them both up? Could you get something going? Because one residential.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, we process reports like that all the time, and usually like that. In the city of LA, you could still have like a mixed use on it if the residential uses are contained on the residential side. Then obviously the commercial property can accommodate both residential and commercial, so you can have a
So how would that work though? Would the residential become commercial or would it?
No, it would still be residential, even if they're tied together. I mean, there are even like singular pieces of property
만나는 거를 아니.
that have two separate zoning designations.
아니 그러면요 사모님.
All right.
So I mean, it's kind of like
그게 아니고 집에 계세요?
You basically just
그러니까
need
계시면
to like contain all of the uses, like how we talked about,
내가 이 집을 안 간다고
where the zoning designation gives
사모님
you
나가서 여쭤볼 게 있으니까 대화를
the
좀
uses allowed. So basically, as long as
그 상황에 대해서 제가
and
사모님
each lot is
도움을
developed in
받았거든요.
accordance to the standards that are provided in the zoning code, then it doesn't really
아니
matter
뭐 뭔가를 잘 하려면
if
서로 그게
you're mixing properties.
Okay.
Where's the value page on that? Is that the last page? How much the property would be worth?
Oh yeah. So yeah, we have the analyzer on the bottom here too.
Money shot.
We'll have to create a new master class that goes into how to use the analyzer further.
Yeah, this is kind of where I got confused a little bit.
Yeah.
Type 1 would be wood structure, right? Is that
Type 1 would be like steel high rise,
steel?
usually over 6 stories. Type 3 would be like concrete, and then type 5 would be wood framed, usually up to 3 or 4 stories. Yeah, then for everything else, land cost would obviously be the amount, like the cost that's provided up here, how much you're going to pay for the property, and then average rents we let you decide how you want to kind of weigh it, and the cap rate as well. We leave it up to you, but you can go into that further in a later training session.
Yeah, play around with it. Okay.
For sure.
Okay.
Yeah, did anyone else have any other questions on anything? Cool. So yeah, if we're all good, I think we can wrap it up. Yeah, I just want to thank everyone for taking the time to learn a little bit more about our reports and kind of the background of what's going on with the information itself. But obviously, if you think of anything else or have any other general questions about what we talked about today, you can feel free to email our contact email, which is contact@brickwork.la.
Are you gonna have this video?
Yeah, we'll also post the video.
I came in a little late.